Hey everybody. Hey everybody. I just wanted to answer a question I got really quick, which was somebody I know was going to a big city and ran into some kosher food and asked kind of what's going on with that. So I wanted to cover that really quick. So kosher is a Jewish thing, um, and the Jewish people, if you don't know, uh, just like a lot, like kind of like Lutherans, there's groups of people who are kind of they're Jewish because they were ethnically born Jewish, like that's their ancestry, that's like their race. Then there are people who are religiously Jewish. There are people who are just like they don't actually buy into the religion, but they believe in in the traditions, and they're culturally Jewish. And two of the three of them tend to keep kosher. So kosher is part of the Old Testament law. Getting a little bit ahead of myself, let's go for the definition really quick. And this comes from mechonmamre.org, mechon-mamre. The actual word is not kosher, but it's kashrut, which comes from the Hebrew word kaf, shin, and resh, which means fit, proper, or correct. It's the same root word as the most commonly used word kosher, which just describes the food that meets these. You can use kosher also to describe ritual objects that are made in accordance to the Jewish law, and they kind of fit the ritual root. Kosher is not just a style of cooking. Kosher Chinese food, for example, can be kosher if it's cooked right. It doesn't just have to be Jewish food. It's some laws in the Old Testament about how food is to be prepared, etc. So in the Old Testament, there's three basic types of law, right? You have the moral law, which is like the Ten Commandments. And interestingly enough, in the New Testament, so for Christians, every single bit of the moral law is repeated, is restated for us, except for the Sabbath. So we still view that as ongoing. And then there is the judicial law, like how to run the country of Israel. Here's how you inherit land. Here's how you sue your neighbor. And that doesn't really necessarily apply both to non-Jewish people and to Jews not living in the nation of Israel. Israel itself doesn't necessarily follow these rules. Modern Israel is kind of different than ancient Israel and doesn't necessarily follow those rules either. But then the third group of law is called ritual or purity laws, right? And these are things like what kind of clothes you can wear, what kind of food you can eat. And in the Old Testament, there's kind of two things rolled up in this, two or three things. So let's kind of break it down. First, you have the ceremonial law, like cleanliness laws, like how you should wash, what kind of clothes you should wear, what you should do if you've got like an infection in your house, like if your house is rotting. And then there's like priestly law about what kind of sacrifice for this kind of occasion and which kind of days. And then there's this law that we would kind of call kosher, which is what kind of food you can eat. Now, why would there be rules about what kind of food you can eat? Well, I'm going to go to the original source text really quick. And if you want to double check me, because who am I to double check yourself? It's in Leviticus chapter 11 is the first time you really get it spelled out for what kind of food you can and can't eat. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but here's the start of it. And the whole chapter of Leviticus 11 is laws about what kind of food you can eat. And so people who keep kosher, they're either keeping this for religious beliefs because they believe in the old, that they're part of the Old Testament covenant, and they're trying to fulfill that, right? That would be like religious Judaism, or they're trying to do it as part of their cultural history, right? This is kind of ethnic Judaism. People who are just kind of like atheist Jews, they don't typically care much, and this isn't necessarily a big deal for them. And so you'll actually hear Jewish people ask each other, "Do you keep kosher?" And this is what they mean: is like, "Do you follow these rules?" So here's some examples. Here's a quick example at the start of the list of Leviticus chapter 11. And this is clean and unclean animals. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the people of Israel, saying, These are the living things that you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. whatever parts of the hoof whatever parts of the hoof, and it doesn't have one round hoof like a horse, and is cloven footed, and chews the cud among the animals you may eat. Nevertheless, among those that chew the cud or part the hoof, you shall not eat these: the camel, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, and the rock badger, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, and the hare, because it goes through, and the pig, and it keeps going through. And as you keep going, it's like you can't eat bats. There's some kinds of fish that you can eat, and so the people that keep kosher, they do these things. There's also some rules about like how food gets prepared, and it seems really weird that God would care what you eat from a modern American perspective. But every time God gives a rule, there's a reason, right? And the reasons are always based on one of two things. Either he gives us the rule because he's trying to look out for us, or he's giving us the rule because he's trying to make us more like him. So some of these rules are to be set apart, to appear holy, because we're supposed to be like God and God is holy. That was part of the mission of the old physical kingdom of Israel. And then the other parts can be like biological, you know. So some of these foods that get a lot of these foods actually that get forbidden, particularly in the seafood, they're bottom feeders, right? They're eating basically fish poop and what grows in fish poop. And we can like look at them biologically and say, well, these things, if they're not cooked really thoroughly, they have more parasites. The pigs are outlawed, and if you want to look up trichinosis, undercooked pig meat, there's a parasite that can actually go up in your brain, and because human physiology is close enough to a pig that it can live long enough to get to your brain, but then it dies and rots. And so you've got a rotting parasite in your brain. Your brain doesn't do really well with things decaying in the middle of it. It's really bad for you. And so if you don't have enough fuel to keep things, cook things really well and refrigerate them really well, then things go bad. And I know the kid who asked me this is a Boy Scout. I know you've kind of looked at how to keep food safe when you're out camping, and that's here where it's much cooler. Now, baking in the desert sun, things go bad really fast. So in the Middle Eastern setting, food doesn't keep very well, and so there's rules about that. And so this is the kind of stuff they keep kosher. To go back to do a good quick summary rather than reading you the whole chapter, I'm going to go back to mechonmamre.org. And this is kind of where they sum it up. Fundamental rules. Although the details of kashrut are extensive, yeah, they're not kidding. The laws all derive from a few fairly simple, straightforward rules. Certain animals may not be eaten at all. This restriction includes the flesh, organ, eggs, and milk of the forbidden animals. Of the animals that may be eaten, birds and mammals must be slaughtered in accordance with Jewish law. I did some digging on this one, and this is kind of interesting. The kosher rules for preparing food is pretty humane. It doesn't stress the animal out. And quite something that's kind of interesting is mammals, when they're killed in stressful ways, they release a bunch of hormones into their meat, and you eat those released kind of activated hormones, which can be a little dodgier than if they are killed in a more humane way. I didn't know that, so I learned something from answering this question today. Thank you very much for that one. Blood must be drained from the meat or boiled out before it is eaten. And that's a pretty straightforward, this goes bad, it's something that would be kind of diseasey. Certain parts of permitted animals may not be eaten, and that makes sense. Would you really want to eat somebody's lower intestine? If you think what comes out of your lower intestine, I bet you probably don't want to eat that of somebody else, huh? All right. There was a rule about mixing meat with dairy because in that actually messed up your digestion, and that was bad for you back then, and it's something that modern technology is taking care of. And then there's rules about utensils. You can't use the same kind of forks and knives to do unclean food and then clean food. And now that we know about microbiology, we can understand, yeah, I'm going to take germs from this rotting piece of meat. I'm going to bring it over to this non-rotting piece of meat. What could possibly go wrong? So God-loving people gave us these, let's probably not. And about half of these they make sense. We understand the biology behind them, and some of them we don't. And we can kind of chalk that up to part of their mission was to look different, so they don't actually follow along, don't look like everybody else, so and act like all the other people in the region, so that people would look at them and go, wow, something's different there, and learn about God as part of the result of that. Finally, the last rule on mechonmamre.org is great products made by non-Jews cannot be eaten and drunk. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but okay. And if you want to dig into this, there's a lot to dig through. There's a reason it took me a little while to go through this. So the next question then is, so that's kind of what keeping kosher is, and that's why they're doing it. So if this is something that's in the Bible, and it is, something commanded by God, and it is, the next question is, but I've believed in God all my life. Why aren't I supposed to keep kosher? And for this one, we're going to go to Acts chapter 10, and I'm going to read a story about Peter and Cornelius. So this one, I'm going to read all of it because it's pretty cool and it makes sense. And it's also a good ending point because I've got some stuff I've got to get done for the rest of the day. But this was a really cool question, and I'm glad I got a chance to answer it. So Peter, of course, was the head of the disciples. Followed Jesus around for all 3 years. Now that Jesus has gone back up into heaven, Jesus died, Jesus rose again, Jesus ascended into heaven, Peter's basically the head of the church. But at this point, they're only telling other Jewish people about Jesus because Jesus was a Jewish Messiah. Christianity hasn't kind of like jumped the fence between ethnically Jewish people and us goyim, are of the nations, us non-Jewish folks. So at Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort. So centurions, by the way, total badasses. If you've seen like big drill sergeants in movies, centurions made them look like wusses. Because a drill sergeant only had to bully like 20 men into line, and centurions had to run 100. Just in their sleep, no problem. A devout man who feared God with all his household gave alms generously to the people. Alms is a old-fashioned word for giving charity to people who were in need, and prayed continually to God. About the 9th hour of the day, that's 3 p.m., he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius. And he stared at him in terror and said, what is it, Lord? Something interesting about angels in the Bible is every time they show up, everybody, I don't care how tough they are, and here's one of the toughest people on the face of the planet, runs into an angel, and the reaction is always, beep, right? Angels are scary. They don't look like Roma Downing, in that old 90s TV show. They're badass, and it's when the one shows up, you're going to notice. So, what is it, Lord? And he said to him, your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa and bring one Simon, who is called Peter. He's lodging with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among them who attended him. Having related everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. So the next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up to the household about the 6th hour, about 6 p.m. actually. And he became hungry, about noon. So this is, he had lunch, and he's like, going to have some quiet time after lunch. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he hadn't had lunch yet, but it's noon. That's why he wants it. He fell into a trance. He saw the heavens opened and something like a great sheet descending, being led down by its 4 corners of the earth. And it were all kinds of animals and reptiles, not kosher, and birds of the air, not kosher. And there came a voice to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, by no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. In other words, I've kept kosher my whole life. I know I'm supposed to keep kosher. Why are you asking me to do something wrong? And the voice came to him again a second time. What God has made clean, do not call common. This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up once up into heaven. Now, while Peter was inwardly perplexed as to what vision he had seen might mean, behold, the men who were sent by Cornelius, having made inquiry for Simon's house, dude, heard of the Simeon dude? Right, stood at the gate and called out to ask whether Simon, who was called Peter, was lodging there. While Peter was pondering the vision, the Spirit said to him, behold, these 3 men are looking for you. Rise and go down and accompany them without hesitation, for I have sent them. And this keeps going, and this obviously is the first message of this is kind of the Jews viewed themselves as holier than everybody else on the face of the planet, and so it was possible that the gospel was just for the special people, and everybody else was kind of unclean and common, the same way that people who keep kosher view on other food as unclean or common. And so that's the first meaning. But the second meaning also kind of is this is basically the end of keeping kosher in the Christian church. And after this moment, we take two meanings out of it, and that's kind of was the end of it. There's also another passage that Jesus said that nothing, which it isn't what comes into somebody's mouth that makes them unclean, which obviously means like clean food, unclean food, but what comes out of their mouth, because it's what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and it's what's inside of you that God really cares about. So that's my quick take on kosher. If you have any other questions, leave a message, leave a comment in the description below, or say something else, and I will answer that. Thank you very much for following along. All right. God bless. Y'all have a good night.